Hey everyone, Announcer of Games here. So, as you can tell from my throat, I'm kinda fucking sick. But, as TikTok is getting banned in the next couple of months here, I'm planning to move a lot of those videos over here in massive compilation videos. But, I'm reformatting them so that way they're more watchable, or you can just listen to them while you're either painting or snacking on something, just kind of that idea. So, sit back, relax, enjoy what I have to offer, and yeah. This coffee, much like the flesh, was bad. That bit left my kitchen a mess. Much like how the Iron Hands are a mess. Okay, but for the sake of all the Iron Hands players, I will not make any headless jokes. The Iron Hands are 40K's really most brutal chapter out there. They are cold, they are logical, and they are uncompromising. As well as the saying goes, I'm more machine now than man. Because the chapter has a really unhealthy obsession of replacing their limbs with robotic ones. They have a strange hatred of their own flesh, much like the Mechanicus do. But why are they like that? Well, it goes back all the way to the Horus Heresy and what happened. You see, before the Iron Hands were the Iron Hands, they were basically a very strong, uncompromising, and brutal legion. But that was more due to their tactics. Essentially, how the Legion used to work was that they would put out a distraction force, and that distraction force would lure the enemy out, and then they would become the hammer and anvil. The distraction force usually never survived. Then, Ferrus Manus was found. In fact, he was the third Primarch found. And his personality was very competitive and very survival of the fittest. If you were strong, you were rewarded. If you were weak, you were ignored. During the time that he was with the 10th Legion, if you were one of his favorite companies, you got all the upgrades and all the good shit. As well, Ferrus Manus would foster competition between all of the companies within the Iron Hands, because he based their company system off of his home planet Medusa's clan system, because he believed it brought out the best in his warriors. But then the Horus Heresy happened, and Ferrus Manus would be killed by his one-time best friend and brother, Fulgrim. Now, that death shattered the Legion. Funny thing, at the Istvan drop site massacre, there was only one Iron Hands company there, Ferrus Manus' favorite and personal company. Ferrus Manus and his company outpaced the rest of the fleet in a blind rage, chasing Fulgrim. And now that Ferrus Manus wasn't there to temper his men's rivalries and hatred of one another, the Iron Hands fell apart right quick. There was no trust, there was no brotherhood among them. Hell, some of them actually fell in with the traitors because they believed that everyone had abandoned them. Others blamed the Salamanders and Raven Guard for their cowardice in not supporting their Primarch, even though they weren't there and they didn't know the context of the situation. The Iron Hands, for the rest of the heresy, were ad hoc militia forces basically doing guerrilla warfare with whoever they could get their hands on. And yes, there were groups of Iron Hands that were fighting alongside Raven Guard and Salamander survivors, but they were few and far between. So, after the Horus Heresy, when all the survivors were reunited, it was, without a second thought, a really good way to just split all those clans away from the main chapter. They already didn't like being around each other, and they were already pretty independent, so they were pretty much chapters to begin with. And over 10,000 years, those negative traits and personalities would continue to fester and grow. In fact, a mindset set within the Iron Hands was that Ferrus Manus failed because he was emotional. So the Iron Hands had to repress and remove their emotions as much as possible. Only use cold, hard logic like a machine. It's what partly led to them replacing their limbs with robotics. A practice in which Ferrus Manus actually detested. You see, Ferrus Manus had silver living metal arms because he basically fought a Necron and dumped it in a fucking lava flow, and its skin became his own skin. And he saw those iron hands of his as a weakness, because it wasn't his own strength. But who cares? He's fucking dead. Let's fucking go. Now, as I said before, the Iron Hands are brutal and uncompromising. They recruit only the strong, and the strong have to still prove themselves. Then, once you're gone through all those recruitment things, you're thrown into one of the many clans. Have fun! This doesn't work like other company systems where you go up from 10th to 1st. You're stuck in that clan for the rest of your life. Each clan has to be self-sufficient, self-maintained, and only come to work with other clans when ordered to by the clan council. Otherwise, it's rivalries and business as usual. But there are two things within the Iron Hands that are seen as the greatest honor: becoming a Tech Marine and becoming a Dreadnought. Yeah, the Iron Hands really fell in with the cult of Mars during the Horus Heresy, and even more so after. So much so as that the Iron Hands actually have their own rank for it called Iron Fathers. Basically think like a captain or chapter master mixed with a Tech Marine. Then you got Dreadnoughts. Remember, these guys think that replacing their limbs is an amazing idea, so imagine being stuck, barely alive, within the sarcophagus of a Dreadnought. Now, the Iron Hands do not have a popular reputation in modern 40k. The Salamanders and Raven Guard steer clear of them as much as possible because the Iron Hands are more so going to use them as living shields than actual allies. And they have a bad tendency to piss everyone off by being all logical and telling them that they're weak, when all an Ultramarine has to do is spill some salt water on them and they start rusting up real quick. But one of the coolest things about the Iron Hands subchapters, including the Iron Hands themselves, is that all of them, personality-wise, fit the stages of grief, where the Iron Hands themselves are denial. We weren't weak, we didn't do anything wrong, we gotta double down on what makes us strong. Whereas one of their subchapters has fully recognized what has happened and has accepted their place in the universe. I don't remember which one that is, though. So, when you get your hands on Space Marine 2, will you be the cold, hard, logical Iron Hands? Or one of their many subchapters? My personal favorite are the Sons of Medusa. I like green. And I did a whole playthrough of Space Marine 2 just the other day, a full 8-hour stream. So if you want to go watch it on YouTube, it's there for your watching to see if it's for you. The coffee machine was inefficient at slaughter, so I gave it to corn. Now it only makes blood, and I really don't like drinking that. The World Eaters were the 12th Legion ever created for the Emperor's Great Crusade. And during those early days of the Great Crusade, the Warhounds, as they were once known as, were the absolute example of what to be for a shock assault legion. In fact, Imperial High Command would use their example to argue for the elimination of the Blood Angels and Space Wolf legions. Because at the time, where the 6th and 9th legions were nothing but marauding hordes of berserking madmen, the Warhounds were exactly what the Imperium needed. They were honorable, they knew restraint, they knew when to stop. Now, for the longest time, the 12th Legion was a reserve legion. Basically, their forces would be on call, and when they were called upon, they would go do their job of a shock assault. But all of that changed when the Primarch Angron was found on the slave world of New Syria. You see, Angron was one of those Primarchs that was extremely unlucky and was found by slavers in not a loving family. And even worse, him and a lot of his fellow slaves were implanted with a thing called the Butcher's Nails. Essentially a device that's implanted inside your head. And that device bites down when you're not killing. It's like an itch you can't scratch. But if you kill something, it releases dopamine and pleasureful chemicals into your brain to basically tell you, good job, slave. Now, Angron was leading a rebellion, and it failed. leading up to the final days where his force would be most likely slaughtered by the Nuceria royalty, the Emperor came down from on high and basically told Angron, leave this place, it's hopeless. And that he was destined for better things somewhere else. And Angron told him to shove it. Angron told him that he was going to die on Nuceria with his brothers and sisters. And the Emperor said nuts to that and teleported Angron right up to his own battle barge the night where everyone was slaughtered. Yeah, Angron was pissed. So much so that he locked himself up in a room and would kill anyone who came in. And after they were able to knock him out, they found out that the butcher's nails could not be removed without killing Angron, even though they were killing him. So the Emperor threw up his hands and said, well, 12th Legion, you figure it out. By the time they did figure it out, half the command structure was dead. The one who convinced Angron was the 8th Assault Captain named Karn. Karn didn't try to speak to Angron's loyalty, his duty, anything. He spoke as if he was in awe of Angron. But not just Angron, the slave forces that Angron led. Because to Karn, facing down innumerable odds with only nothing but an axe in your hand, that's the sign of a true respectable warrior. And Karn, in a bloody mess, begged Angron to make the Warhounds not dogs of the Imperium, but his eaters of worlds, in reference to the slave rebellion. And Angron would agree, making Karn his equerry, his second in command. And Angron would make sweeping changes to his now world eaters. One of those massive changes was the butcher's nails. If the world eaters wanted to be like the slaves of Nuceria, Angron would grant them that request and show them what it's like. Yeah, when everyone found out about this, it was a nightmare. That shock assault legion, that new restraint that was honorable, were now nothing more than berserking slaughterers. And by the time of the Horus Heresy, most of the World Eaters were implemented with it. And it wouldn't take much for Horus to convince Angron to rebel. In fact, the World Eaters were one of the first traitor legions to join Horus. If Angron and his World Eaters could make that despot of an emperor bleed, they would do it. And the World Eaters would follow their lord because they were desperate to please him. To be the kind of warriors that would make him proud. But during a joint operation with the Word Bearers against the Ultramarines, there was no going back. During the Horus Heresy, the Word Bearers and the World Eaters would conduct the Shadow Crusade among the systems of Ultramar. And it was here where the World Eaters would find Nuceria again. And it's here where Angron would learn that he developed a nickname on the planet, a coward, leaving the rebellion he started to die. Angron and the World Eaters were furious, and they wiped the planet clean of all life. However, an Ultramarines Retribution Strike Force managed to catch up to them on Nuceria and pin them down there. And even worse, Angron was dying thanks to the Butcher's Nails. In fact, he probably wouldn't survive this battle if he got away. But the Word Bearer's Primarch Lorgar had a plan. He used the slaughter on Nuceria to ascend Angron to demonhood. Angron was the second Primarch to become a demon prince. And whatever cohesion was left in the World Eaters was gone at that point. Yeah, they rallied at the Siege of Terra, and they were pretty famous for being the first one through the walls all the time, but there was little cohesion with this marauding band of berserkers that gave themselves to Khorne. And after Horus's death, they would be the last ones to leave Terra. Now, the World Eaters were desperate for some kind of command structure, and they fell upon Karn to lead them. And Karn did for a time, until Scalthrax happened. Inside the Eye of Terror, there is a demon world known as Scalthrax, and during the day, it is hot as balls out there. But at night, it becomes frigid as all hell, Marines literally freezing in their armor. The World Eaters and the Emperor's children were fighting over this world. And when nighttime came and showed how horrible it was, both sides agreed to a ceasefire temporarily. But Karn, who was already a devotee to Khorne and was pretty much a berserking madman, did not like the ceasefire. So if his men wanted warmth, fine. He took up a flamethrower and burnt up all their houses. Anyone who tried to stop him was cut down. The World Eaters fell in on themselves. Without their Primarch to unite them and without a strong company captain to lead them, the World Eaters shattered into thousands of desperate warbands. Most of them devoted to Khorne, the Blood God. And in recent 40k, that's pretty much what they are still. Berserkers lost to blood rage and needing to fight so that way they can grab skulls and blood for Khorne. If they ever do come together, it's because Angron is leading them, and only temporarily. And only those who are brave and stupid enough follow Karn the Betrayer. All of these soldiers wanted was a Primarch to honor and follow. And they found a Primarch that didn't give a shit about them, mostly due to his own baggage. Only for all of them to end up with a much crueler master. So, when you are able to play Space Marine 2, will you be a World Eater? Every kill you get, dedicated to the Blood God Khorne. And if you want to watch me play Space Marine 2, go to my YouTube and Twitch. I stream. For duty and honor, I have made you a fresh cup of coffee. We talk about our boys in blue. The titular chapter that you will be playing as for the majority of the Space Marine 2 campaign. In the side campaign, you can customize your guy to not be an Ultramarine, but I'm being an Ultramarine, fuck you. The Ultramarines would be the 13th Legion out of the Emperor's Adeptus Astartes. Of course, their Primarch is Roboute Guilliman. Now, unlike the 5th edition Codex, though I do love my blueberries, I am not gonna go splurging on all of you. Keep it straight to the point. You see, before the events of the Horus Heresy and even before Roboute Guilliman was found, the Ultramarines were a legion that felt like they needed to, keep up with everyone else's glories. So they would throw themselves right into the anvils of war. Though, even before Guilliman came back to the Legion, the Ultramarines were fairly well organized and liked working together. They had a strong unit cohesion in comparison to other legions at the time. But then, Roboute Guilliman would be found on the homeworld of Macragge, ruling his own little galactic empire. Turns out, Guilliman was quite the statesman and politician. And when he was recruited into the Great Crusade and the Imperium at large, he was given command of the 13th Legion, and he took to it with gusto. With Guilliman's reorganization of the entire Legion along with its recruitment, the Ultramarines began to swell to numbers that they had never seen before. By the start of the Horus Heresy, the Ultramarines had around 200 to 220,000 men. They were considered the largest legion at the time. However, due to the heresy, Horus would maneuver the word bearers to sabotage and to horribly cripple the Ultramarines. During the Battle of Calth, which was basically where the word bearers said, Horus is a traitor and so are we to the Ultramarines, because the Ultramarines didn't know at the time, they had eliminated 75% of the legion that was there. 170,000 Marines died without a fight. Basically, the word bearers sabotaged the planet Calth's orbital defense system, and it bombarded those on the ground and those in space. Along with the word bearers putting their ships in between Ultramarine ships, and then just bombarding both ships at the same time. The slaughter was so horrible that the word bearers were able to enact a ruin storm, which basically cut the galaxy in half, making sure the Ultramarines couldn't go help Terra when it needed it. Now, luckily, the Ultramarines would survive and push the Word Bearers and World Eaters out with the help of the Blood Angels and Dark Angels, and they would rebuild their legion to about half their number by the time of the Siege of Terra. And the Ultramarines and Dark Angels made sure that the Blood Angels could make it to Terra by using a shortcut that they only had a limited time to use. But sadly, the Ultramarines, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves would not make it to Terra on time to support in the final battle. But after the Horus Heresy, Gulliman would become Imperial Regent, which was basically, he's the de facto political leader. And he would pen up the Codex Astartes, a military doctrine and book that would basically tell the Space Marines that they would need to abide by it. Essentially, all the legions were to split themselves into 1,000-man strong chapters. The idea was it would prevent the same kind of power being in one man's hands like it was with Horus's. Now, not everyone agreed at first, but eventually everyone came around. Now, Gulliman made the Codex Astartes with the intent that, yes, everyone has to be a 1,000-man strong chapter, but during battle or during a crusade or a war, you need to make decisions that the book cannot possibly cover. So you remember that Black Templar loophole that I talked about earlier? Yeah, not much of a loophole. It was intended to be that way. Because Gulliman knew that the Space Wolves, the Salamanders, and the Imperial Fists would be doing that kind of stuff. But the Ultramarines would divide themselves into 1,000-man strong chapters and had the most during the second founding. Big shock, having a good organizational system actually helps you. Then Gulliman gets wounded and he's put in stasis for 10,000 years. And over those 10,000 years, many chapters, including his Ultramarines, began to worship the Codex Astartes as though it wasn't a military book, but as a religious holy text. I.e., you have to follow it no matter what. Which, when Gulliman was revived during the Gathering Storm event and saw what his Ultramarines and all the subchapters had become, he wasn't happy. The Ultramarines of modern 40k have changed drastically personality-wise. They are slowly starting to go back to their old Legion ways of thinking, thanks to Gulliman and the Primaris Marines. Which was basically run tons of logistics, tons of algorithms to see what is the best outcome of engagement. But also being very politically and socially aware of where they're going and what they're doing. Believe it or not, Ultramarines are trained to be leaders and diplomats. As Gulliman believed that during times of peace, you should be a productive member of society. And he didn't want his Ultramarines just standing on guard duty like the Imperial Fists would over a wall. And so Ultramarines engage in learning politics, learning city infrastructure, all that kind of jazz. They are encouraged to be more than a Marine. Kind of fits in with their jack-of-all-trades nature. So, when you are finally able to play Space Marine 2, will you stay playing as an Ultramarine like I do? Or play as one of their many famous subchapters like the Nova Marines or the Iron Snakes? And I'll be streaming Space Marine 2 more and more over this coming month, so if you want to come watch, go join my YouTube or Twitch. Courage and honor, we march from a crag! Also, don't watch this movie. This movie is terrible. God. Don't drink the coffee. Mortarion put something in it and they had to make a new pot for you. The Death Guard are the 14th Legion ever created for the Emperor's Great Crusade. In modern 40k, they are the Servants of Nurgle, led by hordes of Plague Marines. But you'd be pretty surprised about how they started as a legion. Back during the final days of the wars on Terra, the 14th Legion was known as the Dusk Raiders, as they were a raiding force that attacked at dusk. They preferred the hit-and-run attacks, make a brutal attack, and then flee off into the night. And they would continue operating this way for quite a while, until they found their Primarch, Mortarion. You see, Mortarion was found on a planet called Barbarous, a death world. The planet was covered in poisonous fogs, and the only way for any population to live in it was the valleys. However, Barbarous was ruled over by a bunch of necromancers, so even those valleys weren't safe. and it's one of those necromancers that would find Mortarion. Now, the necromancer would raise Mortarion, but Mortarion would escape his adoptive father and go and defend the humans of the valley, as he felt more of a kinship with them. And Mortarion would succeed in his fighting against the necromantic lords on Barbarous. The only one left by the time the Emperor had arrived was Mortarion's adoptive father. And of course, the Emperor offered Mortarion aid. Couldn't fucking offer Angron the same thing, asshole? But Mortarion told the Emperor to shove it, as he could do this himself, and he didn't need the Emperor or the Imperium's help to do it. Yeah, the Emperor would end up saving Mortarion from his own folly, as he was literally choking on his own insides as the Necromantic Lord came out to kill him. And Mortarion was extremely ungrateful for being saved. The Emperor not only stole his kill, but made him look weak in the process. But Mortarion would pledge his service to the Emperor and be assigned the 14th Legion. When the Dusk Raiders met their Primarch, they met him in an airlock, and he changed their name by carving the new name into the airlock, calling them his Death Guard, in reference to his rebel forces on Barbarous that killed the Necromantic Lords. From there, the Death Guard would change. Not only would their gray, red, and gold become pearl, white, green, and brass, they would change their tactics to attrition warfare. Along with the new recruits from Barbarous, the 14th Legion became extremely tough. As well, Mortarion would organize all of their companies into 7 great companies, giving a captain who was in charge of one of those great companies a lot of power. But Mortarion would also encourage unhealthy rivalries among his officers, not helped by First Captain Callus Typhon throwing his weight around and supporting those that he personally liked. As well, the Death Guard made sure to get rid of all of their librarians, as Mortarion hated Psykers. He saw what the Necromantic Lords did on Barbarous, so yeah, of course, he'd have an aversion to fucking warp magic. He hated it so much that he argued for the dissolution of the Thousand Sons Legion. So yeah, you can tell Mortarion didn't have a lot of friends, and nor did the Death Guard, but their biggest ally was Horus and his Luna Wolves. Both legions filled in the weakness of one another, where the Luna Wolves were fast and hard-hitting, but lacked the attrition warfare, and where the Death Guard lacked the speed and tenacity of the Luna Wolves, both filled in their weaknesses perfectly. As well, Mortarion and Horus agreed on a lot of things, so it was no wonder that Mortarion and his Death Guard would be the first ones to join in Horus's rebellion. However, it would be the loyalist Death Guard elements within their legion that would warn the Imperium about Horus's treachery. It was actually fairly surprising to Mortarion and the traitor Death Guard how many loyalists were actually among their number. In fact, one of the people that did escape on the ship, the Eisenstein, the group that would go warn the Emperor, was the 7th Captain, Nathaniel Garro. Having one of your own great captains betray you? Oof. Now, the Death Guard would see hundreds of battles during the Horus Heresy. But over the years, as the traitors began to use foul warp magics, Mortarion was starting to question his side a lot. Remember, the guy hated warp magic and psychers, and now he was surrounded by them. His own men getting into the esoterics. In fact, he was so desperate for someone to not be warp tainted that he went to Jagatai Khan, and those two didn't get along. He tried to convince the White Scars Primarch to join the traitors, and rightfully got called out for it. In fact, it was Mortarion's actions that would lead to the White Scars ultimately siding with the Loyalists. Guy can't seem to stop taking L's. But the biggest tragedy for the 14th Legion was when Callus Typhon killed all their navigators on their way to Terra, stranding them in the warp. It's here where Typhon revealed that he had always been a Psyker. and promised that he could guide the 14th Legion out of the warp. With no options left, literally, Mortarion had no choice but to accept. But of course, it was a trap. Typhon had long since fallen to chaos and had fallen in with the plague god Nurgle. Typhon led the entire fleet into Nurgle's realm, and all of those things that made the Death Guard famous, their toughness, their resilience, everything, was used against them when they were all infected with Nurgle's rot. Even Mortarion, a man who proclaimed that he could be felled by no poison or disease, keeled over in pain as the disease that racked his body just couldn't kill him, but it was extremely painful. And Nurgle offered Mortarion a way out, in service to the plague god. And Mortarion accepted, being ascended to demonhood to escape the pain that he could not handle. And the Death Guard were turned into plague marines, disease-ridden super soldiers where their guts and entrails were just hanging out and pus-filled, absolutely. And Typhon was rewarded as he was fused with one of these plague marines to create Typhus, home of the Destroyer Hive. When the Death Guard made it to Terra, they were not the same. Now, of course, they too would be repelled from Terra, but modern-day 40k Plague Marines and Death Guard, they have fully embraced the gifts of Grandfather Nurgle and wish to spread those gifts. They became specialists in biological and chemical warfare, as well as be mid to close range specialists, so they could see how their work and their gifts are affecting others. In fact, their most recent campaign was to spread plagues among the systems of Ultramar. And even though they would be defeated in the field of battle, they still left their mark on Ultramar. So, when you get Space Marine 2, will you be a son of Mortarion, spreading the plague god's gifts to one and all? And if you want to watch me play Space Marine 2, I stream it on YouTube and Twitch. And if you want to learn how to play Death Guard, I have an army guide coming up for them for the Horus Heresy. Stay tuned. So, I let my favorite Traitor Legion in, and they said they could make any drink that I wanted, but they didn't say how they were doing it. So it's Oh, you sons of bitches, you know I brushed my teeth! The Thousand Sons are the 15th Space Marine Legion created for the Emperor's Great Crusade. But no one really knew why. You see, the 15th Legion was made up of entirely psychic individuals. And if you don't know what a psyker is, a quick explanation. You see, over time, humanity began to evolve and began to influence the warp. These individuals, called psychers, could essentially move and weave it to their whim. However, if they did it too much, then they could open up a portal to the warp, unleashing whatever horrors are on the other side. They also tended to get possessed by demons a lot. So many different groups did not trust psychers at all, so it was very weird that the Emperor was employing a legion of them. And unlike a lot of the other legions, the Emperor took a lot of self-interest within the 15th. In fact, whenever the 15th deployed, he was usually the one leading them. But, much like the Emperor's children, tragedy would strike these Thousand Sons. For some strange reason, any member of the 15th Legion would just randomly mutate into a ball of flesh or something worse. And no matter what the Emperor or his gene scientists tried to do, they couldn't fix it. And even when Imperial High Command found out about it and demanded that the Emperor just censor this Legion, get rid of them, he didn't. Now, the 15th Legion's salvation would come when they found their Primarch, Magnus the Red. Magnus was found on the desert paradise world of Prospero, a place where Psychers went to, hide and get away from the wider galaxy. And when the Emperor arrived on Prospero, he and Magnus interacted as if they were old friends reunited. And the Emperor quickly set Magnus to work trying to find a cure for this flesh change. But no matter what Magnus did or what he found, it never helped, so it led him to do something desperate. He secluded himself for 9 days, and then after those 9 days, he came out of his chamber, but the flesh change was gone, but so was one of his eyes. Magnus wouldn't tell anybody, but he made a deal with the devil. But the 15th Legion, now calling themselves the Thousand Sons, survived and went on to continue their work during the Great Crusade. Now, there were other Psychers within the other legions called Librarians, and some of the Primarchs really liked their Librarians, like the White Scars. They actually had their own council of Psychers. But each legion had their own ways of viewing psychic powers. The Blood Angels were on the side of only use them rarely. The White Scars were only use them as you need them, but the Thousand Sons were use them as much as you like. They're your powers. You should not be afraid of knowledge. You should not be afraid to learn. And yeah, Jagatai Khan, who was Magnus's best friend, would agree with that idea. He just cautioned restraint and patience. But Magnus and his Thousand Sons thought they knew better and could control the warp. And this arrogance and blatant use of psychic powers would bring them into conflict with many legions, like the Death Guard and most infamously, the Space Wolves. And this conflict would come to a head during the Council of Nicaea, also known as the Trial of Magnus the Red. The idea was to figure out what is the purpose of Psychers within the Imperium, with Magnus the Red, his Thousand Sons, Sanguinius and his Blood Angels, and Jagatai Khan the White Scars, along with Fulgrim and his Emperor's Children, on the side of positive vibes for the Psychers, while Leman Russ, his Space Wolves, Mortarion, and his Death Guard on the detractor side. Both sides gave their arguments, but the Emperor gave his final verdict, not in favor of the Thousand Sons. He declared that this experiment of his was a failure. Unless a Psyker was training to be a navigator or a telepath so they could communicate, all Psychers were to shackle their powers, whether they be mortal or space marine. As well, hitting the Thousand Sons with a pretty bad censure. Magnus and his Thousand Sons, defeated and depressed, would go back to Prospero to recuperate and figure out what the hell to do from there. But it's during that recuperation that Magnus would find out about Horus's betrayal. He tried to use psychic powers to warn Horus and try to stop the betrayal, but he only set it in motion. So typically, you as a Psyker, and your father being a Psyker, you could share your memories of it, so you would get on a ship and go talk to your dad, right? No. He proceeded to double, triple, quadruple down and use psychic powers to try and reach his father, only to hit a literal psychic wall when his soul made it to Terra. And thanks to that very helpful devil again, he blew through those psychic wards and let demons get on Terra, trying to tell the Emperor that Horus was a traitor, and he wasn't able to get that message to him. The Retribution Force was fast. The Space Wolves came and destroyed Prospero. They were tricked by Horus into doing it. The Emperor wanted Magnus and his Thousand Sons arrested, not killed. But the Space Wolves, along with the Custodes and Sisters of Silence, decimated the 15th Legion and broke Magnus the Red so badly that he had requested that Tzeentch offer up his side of the deal and save his sons. And Tzeentch did, saving the Thousand Sons. And Magnus the Red would become a demon prince of Tzeentch. Now, the Thousand Sons would take part in the siege of Terra, but only briefly and for a very short time. After that, the Thousand Sons just kind of secluded themselves in the world of sorcerers, and Ahriman, their first captain, was desperately trying to find a way to stop the now coming back flesh change. He tried to get Magnus to help, but Magnus was just totally done with the situation. Which Ahriman and a couple of sorcerer buddies would conduct a ritual called the Rubric of Ahriman to stop the flesh change. And it worked. Not in the way they wanted. If you had a chance or were psychically gifted, unlike your brothers, your powers were enhanced. But if you were just a minor psyker, like most of the Legion was, you were turned to dust in your armor, and your armor became basically welded shut. Your soul trapped within the armor. Now, Magnus, when he found out, was extremely pissed and tried to kill Ahriman for what he did, but Tzeentch revealed to both of them, yeah, that was the plan the entire time. Hey, the other three assholes have their own legions by their design, why can't I have mine by my design? The 1,000 Sons of modern 40k are arrogant and powerful sorcerers, puppeting around their brothers like sick marionettes. And they hunt for knowledge and power, either to empower their legion or themselves. All with the hope to get revenge on those that slighted them, most specifically the Space Wolves Legion. While Ahriman is desperate to try and fix what he broke. The 1,000 Sons are my favorite legion within 40k without a shadow of a doubt. And yes, they did do everything wrong. They're my favorite, but guess what? You don't get a free pass for being my favorite. Now, sadly, you cannot play them right now in Space Marine 2, but they are one of the main antagonists of Space Marine 2, so that made me stupid happy. Hopefully they get something for PvP. I'd really like that. And if you want to watch me play Space Marine 2, subscribe to my YouTube or Twitch. You see, there were only two options to prevent the Horus heresy. Family therapy, or letting the galaxy burn. And the Emperor wouldn't pay for family therapy. So we let the galaxy burn. Grab some coffee, today's about the Black Legion. Now, the 16th Legion has gone by 3 names over the course of its lifespan. They were known as the Luna Wolves in reference to their first assault on Luna and the defenders of Luna saying to the Emperor, please call off your wolves. Later on, they would change their name to the Sons of Horus, as Horus's War Master had his ego hit at one point and he wanted to feel better, so he changed their name as he was already given permission to do so. We'll talk about the third name at the end. But yeah, the Sons of Horus were the 16th Legion ever created for the Emperor's Great Crusade, and they were one of the poster boys for the Great Crusade. It was also helped by the fact that Horus was the first Primarch that was found. They were the first Legion to have their Primarch back and had them the longest. And as I said, they were the stars of the Great Crusade. Horus was well loved by both Imperial High Command and anyone who met him most of the time. As well, the 16th had the perfect strategy that Horus loved to use. Vicious, brutal, fast assaults. Horus wanted to get wars over with as fast as possible, so a lot of his strategies always resolved around ending the war as fast as possible. And the 16th was the perfect legion for it. Then, Horus became War Master. And there was a few good reasons why. He was a good politician, he was a good general, he was just really good at what he needed to be. The others weren't chosen because personality-wise, they just didn't fit the role. And in the case of Sanguinius, he was too perfect, so no one would have ever questioned him. However, being War Master took its emotional and mental toll on Horus. He was forced to lead very abruptly an entire crusade and command structure that was constantly hounding him. Even a Primarch's got his limits. And it got so bad that any failure or any questioning of his strategy felt like a personal attack. It also didn't help that he had that chucklefuck Erebus whispering sweet nothings into his ear. This would lead to the events of Davin, where Horus's best moral human friend had betrayed the Imperium and Horus went down to execute him himself and got wounded by a special demonic blade. Horus was in a coma and dying, and nothing was working to save him. So when Erebus came a-knockin' and offered that, oh, I know a way how to cure him, the sons of Horus, who deeply saw Horus as their own father figure, agreed to it. Horus was brought to a special temple where he could commune with the gods of chaos directly, and they would decide if they would heal him or not. In those visions, Horus was shown, without context, the modern 40K universe. And they let his own depression and paranoia get the better of him, leading to him creating the Horus Heresy after he got out of the temple. And 90% of the sons of Horus followed Horus without any question. They followed him from the betrayal of Istavan all the way to the siege of Terra. Whatever Horus embraced, the sons of Horus would also embrace. Summoning and using demons in war? Fuck yeah! Start signing my skin, please! But it was very clear by the siege of Terra, Horus had lost his damn mind. It's a long story, but essentially Horus's soul was split in the warp at one point, and he basically was living in 1,000 different timelines all at the same time, with the Chaos Gods puppeting around his body and only giving him control when they wanted to. During the final days of the Siege of Terra, Horus would lower down his void shields on his ship to lure the Emperor to come try to kill him, or so that Horus could make him into the Dark King. Note, Horus wanted to become the Dark King, but the Chaos Gods who were controlling him wanted the opposite. They wanted the Emperor to become the Dark King, and were going to use Horus to do it. As well as a little fucking payback for the Emperor stealing their shit. But we all know how the song and dance goes. The Emperor is mortally wounded, but he is able to kill Horus. Now, the sons of Horus are able to reclaim Horus's body and manage to, flee Terra, but they had a new problem. The rebellion failed, so someone had to take responsibility. The sons of Horus weren't just hounded by vengeful loyalist forces during the Scouring, they were attacked by their fellow traitor legions who really wanted some payback. As well, First Company Captain Ezekiel Abaddon abandoned the Legion to go on his own soul-searching quest. And the sons of Horus were a shadow of their former self. They set themselves up on a planet, hung Horus's corpse up to be worshipped, and just didn't do anything. Then the Emperor's children, led by Fabius Bile, came and stole Horus's corpse, and then left. When Abaddon was convinced to return by a group of other Chaos Space Marines who wanted him to come back, he found his legion basically on the verge of total extinction. Fellow officers he called brothers, trying desperately to get more power for themselves. And rightfully, there was only one man to blame for all of this: Horus. So, Abaddon did what he did best. He killed all the other officers that could challenge him, and then took control of what was left of the sons of Horus, and told them, nah, we ain't going out like this. This new ragtag warband would go and assault the Emperor's children, and find out that Fabius Bile had indeed successfully cloned Horus. But Abaddon was done with that shit. Whether it be a clone or actual Horus, he was done with it, and he killed the clone and burnt Horus's corpse, taking his original talent for his own. Abaddon would then go back to the sons of Horus and say, we are no longer sons of Horus. We are no longer bound by his failure. But we will never forget that shame. Let us never forget the failure that brought us here. And so the sons of Horus were done. They repainted their armor black and gold, and they would become the Black Legion. The Black Legion in modern 40k is the end-all, be-all bad guys of 40k. Instead of just letting anyone with only Horus's gene seed into the Legion, you only need bow the knee to Abaddon, and you are allowed to join the Legion, regardless of who you hail from. And Abaddon has not been idle throughout the entirety of Warhammer 40k. He has launched 13 Black Crusades into real space. each one growing his power, forging alliances, and getting ready for the day that they strike out to Terra. And with the fall of Cadia and the spreading of the Great Rift dividing the galaxy in half, along with helping Vashdor the Archifane succeed in his plans, Abaddon is closer than ever to his goal. But he is still very painfully aware it's going to take longer. But time is something that he knows all too well. And as he waits to rip that corpse off its throne, he will let the galaxy burn. And the Black Legion is more than happy to facilitate their new War Master. So, when you play Space Marine 2, will you be a Hound of Abaddon? Will you take up the black and burn the galaxy to the ground? I know I did. I play them in 40k. Now, I know that I didn't go into a lot of their history. It's a very long, complicated process. I'm saving Horus and Abaddon for fucking October. So if you can, please go give my YouTube and Twitch a sub. I'd very much appreciate it, because we're going to be talking about 40k on stream tonight. Woo! You know, the Word Bears have to be absolutely laughing their asses off, because they made the Imperial religion. Grab a coffee, this is going to be a long-winded one. The Word Bears are the 17th Legion ever created for the Emperor's Great Crusade. In modern 40k, they are the preachers and zealots of chaos. But much like the other traitor legions, you would never expect that from where they came from. Before the Legion met their Primarch and when they were still on Terra, they were known as the Imperial Heralds. Their job was simple: uphold the Imperial truth, i.e. science, logic, and reason. And if any culture resisted the Imperium and the Imperial Heralds, they were to be burnt to the ground. So thoroughly exterminated that nothing was left of the civilization after the Imperial Heralds were done with them. The 17th's loyalty was absolute. But then, the Primarch Lorgar was found. Lorgar was found on the religious planet of Colchis, a world where Lorgar led a religious revolution and took it over for the Imperium. When the Emperor and the Great Crusade landed upon Colchis, they were met with tons of parades and festivals, all in honor of the Golden God come to liberate them. Which, to Imperial High Command, was a little bit uncomfortable. But the Emperor waved it off, as these were clearly loyal citizens of the Imperium now. Lorgar was then given to the 17th Legion, and they worked remarkably well together. Lorgar had a way of speaking to men and women's hearts, and he won his legion over with a passionate, fiery speech. The Imperial Heralds were changed their name to the Word Bearers. But they would also start spreading the word of the divinity of the Emperor. Every world that the Word Bearers conquered, they would take their time spreading this religion to the populace. Building effigies, building monasteries, rebuilding cities to basically be religious cities. Now, for a time, the Emperor continued to ignore it. But when the 17th's pace crawled to a snail's pace, he had no choice but to get involved. Especially when he found out that every world that the Word Bearers had conquered became religious planets. Now, just to sum things up here really quick, the Emperor did not like religion. He found that it caused all of humanity's problems. As well, he wanted to weaken the forces of chaos, as the power of belief gave chaos power. Not that he told any of his sons. So, he gathered the Imperial High Command structure, Malcador the Sigilite, his right-hand man, and the Ultramarines Legion. They would call the Word Bearers back to a planet named Kur, so they could watch as the city that they took the most time on, Monarchia, was burnt to the ground. The Emperor forced the 17th Legion and their Primarch to kneel in the ashes of Monarchia. He would chastise Lorgar and the 17th for their actions, hoping that this would be a harsh lesson that could, redeem them. But as Gulliman points out in one of the books, yeah, that's not how that works. Just to let you all know, Gulliman and the Ultramarines were horrified that they were made to do this. Because Gulliman was right, it didn't make them learn a lesson, it just humiliated them. Lorgar felt rejected by the Emperor and was now lost. But two members of his legion, Corferon, his adoptive father, and Erebus, had other gods that Lorgar might be interested in. Corferon and Erebus had always been loyal to the Chaos Gods, but they used getting into the Legion as a way to grow their own power and to set things in motion. They set up a pilgrimage for Lorgar, leading him to a planet that one day would be called Cadia. And there, Lorgar and the Word-Bearers would meet with the powers of chaos. Gods that deserved their worship, and they would side with chaos. Yeah, that's right. The first traitors were not Horus and his Luna Wolves, it was Lorgar and his Word-Bearers. It was Lorgar and Erebus that would set up the situation that would get Horus wounded on the moon of Davin. Word-Bearers that would spread the corrupting influence of the warrior lodges throughout the Legion. And when Horus's rebellion was ready to go, the Word-Bearers were all too eager to side with him. As well, all too eager to get revenge on the 13th Legion for what they did to Monarchia. They would decimate the 13th Legion at Calth, and Lorgar would ascend Angron to demonhood to save him from the Butcher's Nails, only to hand him over to a crueler master. It would be Erebus that would set Karn on the path of becoming Khorne's greatest champion, as well as sponsor experiments for demonic assassins. However, before the Siege of Terra, Lorgar was getting really upset with Horus that Horus was not choosing to bring the Chaos Gods fully in, and he attempted a coup d'etat against Horus before the Siege of Terra, which failed. Horus would then banish Lorgar and any Word-Bearers loyal to him away from their rebellion. And Lorgar predicted that Horus would fail. Which Horus did. Horus was killed during the Battle of Terra, and Lorgar and his Word-Bearers were nowhere in sight. Inside the Eye of Terror, they would set up their new base of operations on a world called Sakaris. There, the Legion would launch crusade after crusade into the Imperium, spreading word about the faith of the gods to the people. And in modern 40k, they still do their own dark religious crusades, enslaving whole planetary populations to the worship of the dark gods. Hordes of screaming madmen and cultists, led by dark apostles screaming the words of their lords. Specialized possessed units, marines that have given themselves over to demons and now share a symbiotic relationship. The Word-Bearers also find it highly ironic that the Emperor's religion, the one they started, was spread and now became the official religion of the Imperium. Many find this fact to be the most hilarious and cruelest joke they could play on the Imperium, while others are so angry that it just makes their fires of wanting to put the Imperium down for the glory of chaos even stronger. And even into modern 40k, the Legion is still led by Lorgar, Erebus, and Corferon. And they are always ready to launch another crusade into the Imperium to spread the word. So, when you're able to play Space Marine 2 PvP, will you spread the word of the Dark Gods? Dedicating all your kills to one or all of them? And if you want to watch me play Space Marine 2 or talk about Warhammer 40k, subscribe to my YouTube and Twitch. I stream it all. I know nothing about forging weapons, but I do know how to forge a good cup of coffee. Take a seat, friend. I'll be there shortly. Forged to perfection. Speaking of forges, let's talk about the Salamanders. Salamanders are the 18th Legion of Space Marines and is one of the most heavily requested Legion and chapter I talk about. The 18th Legion were distinguished for never giving up on a battlefield no matter what. Through the harshest and most grueling of battlefields during the Great Crusade, the 18th would just keep going no matter what. It was their duty to succeed, even at the cost of their numbers. And as more and more Primarchs were found, they felt like they needed to double and triple their efforts to keep up. It got so bad that their attrition rate was getting up as high as the Iron Warriors was. And during one campaign, it looked like the 18th Legion would actually go extinct. And the only reason it didn't was the arrival of their Primarch, Vulcan, and 3,000 new recruits. Now, when the Primarchs were scattered all across the galaxy in their infancy, Vulcan landed on a planet called Nocturne, a heavily radiated and volcanic hellscape. But he was raised among its population as if he was one of their own. And the people of Nocturne have a very tight-knit community. Everyone is family. And your worth as a person is not put on how strong you are or how smart you are, it's how much you're willing to sacrifice for others. Because again, family and community mean everything to the people of Nocturne. Hence the story of how Vulcan became recruited into the Great Crusade. The Emperor willingly gave up a challenge to save Vulcan's life. So yeah, Vulcan, adhering to those community principles, gave himself to the Emperor. And when he, along with his new Nocturian recruits, saved the 18th Legion, he bowed to them. Because he wanted to show them that their sacrifice and their way of going about things meant a lot to him and the Great Crusade. So he honored those that came before his Nocturian Marines. Now, the Legion did go about rebuilding itself, but it was only around 70,000 Marines, I think. And that number would be decimated during the Drop Site Massacre at the start of the Horus Heresy. Basically, a battle happened where the Salamanders, Raven Guard, and Iron Hands were betrayed by their allies and were basically put between a hammer and an anvil and got absolutely shit-stomped. Where the Iron Hands would lose their Primarch and the entirety of their most elite company and their leadership structure, and the Raven Guard would be knocked down from 90,000 Marines to about 3,000, the Salamanders barely had 500 left. And those 500 Marines were scattered throughout the remaining forces of the Broken Legions. And Vulcan would end up going on a very harrowing adventure, being captured by Conrad, losing his mind, then gaining his sanity back, and then making his way to Terra along with 3 other Salamanders. Note, Vulcan is also something we call a perpetual. Basically, he's immortal and cannot die. Like, shot out into space, through a sun, and survived that. And Vulcan would be on Terra during the Siege of Terra. He was actually basically ready to activate Terra's self-destruct button if the traitors won. But we know how the song and dance goes. Horus loses, Emperor interred on the Golden Throne. Now, when Gulliman penned the Codex Astartes, Vulcan actually didn't agree with it, not out of a sense of, oh, well, you're just trying to take power for yourself, but out of a genuine concern for his Salamanders. Remember, they had 500 men after the Drop Site Massacre, and probably even less so over the 14-year Civil War. The Salamanders literally couldn't do what Gulliman was asking of them. But it's here where Gulliman shows Vulcan there is always exception to the rules, especially when it comes to unique circumstances going on with your Salamanders. Before the Primaris Marines were introduced into 40k, Salamanders in 40k could barely muster 9 companies. Yeah, the Drop Site Massacre was so bad that they couldn't even muster enough for 1,000 Marines. But when the Primaris Marines were introduced, it was like a fucking godsend to them. And that the Sons of Vulcan didn't have to worry about going extinct. Now, the Salamanders based their fortress on one of Nocturne's many moons. And for something very unique to them, they actually still are active within the Nocturian communities. They still talk to and actively be with their Nocturian biological families, making the Salamanders a much more empathetic force of Marines compared to the other ones, because they hang out with regular mortals all the time, so they know what it's like for a human to be around someone like them. And they also understand how scary a Space Marine can be, especially how scary they can be. You see, Nocturne is such a radiated world and hellscape that the people of Nocturne have mutated to have glowing red eyes and coal black skin. And when you, regular Joe Schmo, see that walking up to you, that can be really scary. But the Salamanders understand that and go out of their way to basically make themselves as friendly as possible when it comes to civilian populations. Hell, even recently they started showing sympathy and empathy to Xenos races that they know are going extinct, but they'll still burn them all the same. They also have a unique role within the chapter called a Forge Father. You see, Vulcan went missing, but the Salamanders believe if they find some ancient artifacts and bring them all together, Vulcan will return, so they nominate one Marine to become the Forge Father. And that Forge Father's job is to go find all those artifacts. The current Forge Father is Vulcan Histon. Now, just to let everyone know, Vulcan Histon is not the Chapter Master, that's Tushan. And the Salamanders technically don't have a Chapter Master, they have a First Company Captain. Essentially, he acts like a Chapter Master, but he's not. Now, tactics-wise, the Salamanders are a very close-ranged army. They love meltas, they love flamethrowers, they love hammers. So, when you get to play Space Marine 2, will you be a son of Nocturne? And thanks to the Primaris Marines, the Salamanders now have official subchapters, so will you be a son of Vulcan instead? Either way, Vulcan lives. And hey, if you get Space Marine 2, maybe you could join me on my community nights where I play with my community on YouTube and Twitch. Hope to see you there. The coffee we are making will be like staring into an abyss of despair, much like Corax looks into every day. The Raven Guard are the 19th Legion of Space Marines ever created. And seeing them in modern 40k, you would never believe what they started out as. During the Great Crusade, before they even met their Primarch, the 19th Legion was a shock assault force. They preferred headlong charges and brutal assaults. Which makes sense when you realize that they were seconded to Horus's Luna Wolves, a legion that really loved doing those kinds of tactics. However, things would change when Corax was found. You see, Corax landed on a prison world called Deliverance, and he was raised to be a rebel among its prisoner population and succeeded in a rebellion. So Corax's entire modus operandi was to be an infiltrator, saboteur, and just a stealth guy. So when he and all the new recruits from Deliverance finally met the 19th Legion, it was a massive shock to both systems. And Corax would really struggle with the 19th Legion that was just, we want to do headlong charges and vicious assaults. In fact, during an operation where the Raven Guard were working with the Iron Warriors and Luna Wolves, the 19th Legion that was the shock assault force acted very insubordinate to Corax. Basically, Horus had ordered that the Raven Guard assault a position called Gate 13, and Corax knew that if his legion went in there doing that tactic, they would get slaughtered. But the 19th Legion that basically said, hey, we could totally do that, you're an idiot, Corax just said, fine, whatever, I'll send all of you. Which he did, and not many came back. Then after that, the few hundred survivors were quietly outcasted, heading into the outer dark like sharks, endlessly swimming out there like sharks. Yes, I am just telling you that the 19th Legion that was the Brutal Shock Force became the Concordons. Once that part of the 19th Legion was gone, the Raven Guard could become the Raven Guard. becoming masters of stealth and operators. Freedom fighters for the Imperium! Massively ironic, I know. But then the Horus Heresy happened, and they were a part of the drop site massacre. However, the 3,000 surviving Raven Guard would make it off-world with Corax alive. And they would make it back to Terra, with Corax having a private meeting with the Emperor during the time when the Emperor was fighting the demons in the Golden Throne Room. And he would convince the Emperor to basically give him the ability to make clone Space Marines. And after the raid on Mount Everest, Corax had everything he needed to make a new Legion of Space Marines. And this new Raptor project was pretty successful. In only a few months, they had a fully working Space Marine. In fact, they had a whole company ready to go. But during their escape from Istavan, the Alpha Legion had infiltrated their ranks and sabotaged the cloning project. After that first company was made, any future companies that were made mutated into abominations. And there was no way to fix it, so for all intents and purposes, the Raven Guard were out of the war. They would still engage in hit-and-run operations and sabotage operations, but that was the extent they could do. Then, after the Horus Heresy, they fully agreed to comply with the Codex Astartes. It just fit them. However, feeling shame for everything that happened, Corax would go missing, leaving a message for his sons inside his room inside the Raven Tower, saying, nevermore. In modern 40k, the Raven Guard are still the stealth operators of the Imperium. Their Marines are perfect for guerrilla-styled warfare and infiltration. In fact, they developed technology that allowed their power armor, the loudest goddamn thing in the world, to generate white noise to help them sneak around better. Hell, the Mark VI pattern of Space Marine power armor for the Firstborn was named after Corvus Corax, because it was lightweight and stealthy. Now, the more interesting thing that came out of the Raven Guard was the Raptors chapter, and of course, as everyone keeps asking me, the Space Sharks. The Raptors were those clone Marines. And those two chapters would have a very big role to play in the event known as the Bad Dab War. One chapter adhering to the ways of their Primarch, and the other one adhering to the ways how the 19th Legion used to fight. The Raven Guard are very interesting in the fact that they are rebels for the Imperium. And the irony is not lost. They are freedom fighters fighting for an oppressive Imperium. Ah, sweet, sweet, cruel irony. So, Space Marine 2 comes out for everyone today. Will you be a son of Corax? Or one of his many interesting subchapters, like the Space Sharks or the Raptors? Either way, I'll be playing more tonight on YouTube and Twitch, so if you want to join in, consider following and subscribing. And don't worry, my followers of chaos. The rest of this week is dedicated to us. Delicious heresy. The coffee is gone. Someone drank it, and there's only one person responsible, and his name is Alfarius. The Alpha Legion are the 20th Legion and the last one ever made for the Great Crusade. In modern 40k, they are stealth specialists and infiltrators, able to get in anywhere as well as make any grand conspiracy they want. They are responsible for destabilizing massive amount of regions and systems within the Imperium with just only a handful of agents. And even during the Great Crusade, that was what they did. The 20th Legion was always known for its unorthodox methods of conducting warfare. And as well, most people didn't even know there was a 20th Legion at the time. In fact, it's very arguable that only the Emperor knew about the 20th Legion. As well, when it came to the 20th Primarch, he was never found because he was never lost. The 20th Primarch, by the name of Alfarius, was never lost when all of his brothers were scattered across the galaxy. And we don't know his relationship to the Emperor that well, but we do know that he was trained by the Custodes. In fact, it's Alfarius that inspired the blood games that the Custodes are so famous for. Just a quick thing, the blood games is basically where the Custodes play a little game where they try to assassinate the Emperor so that way they can test their defenses. And Alfarius is the one who kicked it off. It is said that every time one of the Primarchs was found, Alfarius was there, hidden among the regular troops that were a part of that Primarch's legion. It helped that even though Alfarius was a Primarch, he was about just a little bit taller or just as tall as a Marine was. But there was another secret that only Alfarius knew about. He had a twin brother. Over the course of the Great Crusade, Alfarius would come to find Omegon, and the two would swap names. And then after that, eventually, the Alpha Legion would reveal themselves. And many did not trust them, and for good reason. None of the officers would ever go by their real names. They would only refer to themselves as Alfarius. And due to the nature of the wars that they conducted, it left a lot of their honor in question. In fact, it's Robu Guilliman who would go on to say that their methods of warfare are a waste of a bolt shell, as wherever the Alpha Legion deployed, they did too good of a job with their infiltration and left the system a paranoid mess. As well as their operations and schemes got so complicated that sometimes friendly fire incidents would happen. It left the Alpha Legion with very few friends. However, before the Horus Heresy would kick off, the Alpha Legion would be invited to meet with a group called the Cabal. Alfarius and Omegon would be shown a vision of the future. But unlike Horus, who was not given the context to this future, the Cabal did give that context. Now, of course, Alfarius and Omegon are not stupid, and then asked, okay, so what happens if Horus wins? And the Cabal said that chaos would be destroyed at the cost of humanity. Now, Alfarius, the original one, was hesitant on this idea, but Omegon was all for it. So the Alpha Legion sided with the War Master. But over the course of the Horus Heresy, the Alpha Legion would play both sides. They would sabotage loyalist efforts to stop the traitors, but they would make sure that the traitors couldn't salvage anything. They were told to keep the White Scars caged in at the system that they were stuck in, but they allowed them to get through. But the Alpha Legion's biggest gamble was an attack on Pluto within the Sol system. There, Omegon led an attack and was killed by Rogel Dorn. And we know it was Omegon who died because Alfarius was back at his fleet, and remember that they swapped names. So yeah, officially Omegon is dead. Or could that too be a trick? No one knows. What we do know is that during the Siege of Terra, the Alpha Legion managed to hide over 10,000 Marines underneath the Imperial Palace in stasis. The idea was that whoever won the Horus Heresy would not win it for long. However, due to the intervention of an individual named John Grammaticus and his Argonauts, the plan was foiled. Now, the Alpha Legion, aside from those cryotubes, was not around Terra. They had gone off into the galactic south, east, west, and north, continuing to do what they do best. Now, it is said that Guilliman did manage to track Alfarius down and fight him in a duel one-on-one, but it is very unlikely that Guilliman killed Alfarius. Remember, all of the Legion are Alfarius. And even after killing that Alfarius, the Alpha Legion still acted like a well-coordinated machine. And they continue to act like it within 40k, weaving scheme upon scheme upon scheme. Their plan so convoluted and complicated that it would drive lesser people insane. And yes, they have helped the traitor legions do what they do best, but they've also been known to sabotage the forces of chaos just as much as they are to help them. Sometimes a scheme will have an entire star system fall to the powers of the dark gods. Sometimes an entire scheme will reveal to the Imperium a very major chaos threat. Sometimes the Alpha Legion will deal with a threat itself to either side. Either way, we don't know what the Alpha Legion are planning, and it's highly debatable that even they don't know. All we do know is that they are the many-headed Hydra, and that the man beside you might just be Alfarius himself. So, when you're able to play Space Marine 2, will you play as an Alpha Legionnaire? Will you join the infinite ranks of Alfarius? And if you want to watch me play Space Marine 2, go follow my YouTube and my Twitch. Very much appreciated. Hey there. So this is going to be split up into 2 parts, just to shorten down the time, you know? And I thank you so much for sitting through, and let me know what you think in the comments below. This is something really new to me, and it's something that I hope succeeds. If not, I'll have to figure something else out. But in the meantime, please subscribe, please like, please share this around if you can, and I'll see you all next time.